Welcome to the Títqet Land Code information meeting, PowerPoint presentation. This is Dean and
Stephanie.
This is the presentation that we worked on for Títqet's Land Code. This is the picture of the Statlium territory. Títqet is way up in the corner there. But we have to make sure that it's very clear that Títqet Land Code only applies to reserve lands, not the traditional territory.
So the population of Títqet is 440 total members as of October 2018. We have 192 on reserve, 248 off reserve. Population of reserves are concentrated on IR1, 2, 4, and 5. Remaining population live in the rest of BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Washington.
Governance for Títqet. So we've got 4 councils, the elders, elected chief council, Papehla council, and the youth council. They have various portfolios and responsibilities, such as elders, cultural heritage, and Títqet council, programs and services on reserve, and Papehla, they deal mainly with traditional Statlium territory rights.
So how does land management work now? Well, the short answer, very slowly. Under the Indian Act, the minister is obligated to exercise decision-making authority over First Nation reserve lands and resources. Right now, INAC, which has been renamed ISC, which is Indigenous Services Canada. They oversee the implementation and administration of governance processes under the Indian Act and provides funding towards the cost of local government and administering services. Program funding is distributed to First Nations based on a funding formula that takes into account the community's size and the services that it manages.
So funding that Títqet gets, it's determined by basically formulas. So there's population, number of cases that they have going in the income security program, and other things like the geographic index of like where Títqet is.
So the Framework Agreement on First Nations Land Management. In 1992, a small group of chiefs began planning for an alternative which would replace ministerial control with community control, which means that ISC would no longer manage us, that we could manage ourselves. So the chief solution was a government-to-government agreement which would provide their members with the option of drafting their own land code and land laws to replace the minister's land-related obligation under the Indian Act. February 1996, the chiefs signed the Framework Agreement on First Nation Land Management with the Minister of Indian Affairs and Northern Development. This historic signing was signed by the Chippewas of Georgina Island in Ontario.
The Framework Agreement next required ratification by Canada, which Parliament completed with the passage and royal assent of the First Nations Land Management Act in 1999. Ratification of the Framework Agreement by each signatory First Nation requires the community to draft and approve a land code, which is what Títqet is working on right now. 81 First Nations have adopted their own land code as of September 2018. 59 First Nations, including Títqet, are in development.
Indian Act and Community Consent. The land code developed under the Framework Agreement will be the legal foundation for land management powers and authorities, and replaces 34 land management provisions of the Indian Act. The option to regain control of reserve land through a land code can only be undertaken with the consent of the community. This land code only applies to Títqet reserve land. It will not include the shared reserve 1A that we share with Hoiston.
So what is a Títqet land code? It contains a description of the lands that are affected by the land code, details use and occupancy, rules and procedures, requirements for accountability to members, lawmaking procedures and publications, so where the land code will be available, rules for conflict of interest and dispute resolution, rules and procedures for land revenues, description of Títqet's council authority in land matters, rules for granting or expropriating interests, and procedures for amendments and land exchanges.
So what is the Títqet Land Code? It outlines the power of council to make laws, sets limitations to rights and interests, rules for encumbering, seizing, and or executing interest in lands, rules and procedures in relation to treatment of lands after the breakdown of marriage, which this refers to the matrimonial real property laws, which we are under the federal provisional rules as of December 2016, and we will be reviewing this actually next month in with the Land Code Committee. We have a date with a gentleman from the Center of Excellence on January 16th, 2019.
What are the benefits of a land code? It's a step forward for recognition and a means to govern our own reserve lands. It recognizes our inherent right to manage our own reserve lands and provides an opportunity to merge traditional values with modern practices. INAC or ISK will no longer manage lands and resources according to the Indian Act, and it will get more community involvement in land management matters. This is where the Land Advisory Board presentation will go. If you have any questions, go to labrc.com, Land Advisory Board Resource Center.
So the Títqet development phase timeline. So in February of 2014, Títqet Chief and Council signed a BCR, which is a Band Council resolution, to apply to join the framework agreement. In June of 2017, they also signed the implementation agreement and began the 2-year process of developing our own land code and signing an individual agreement. September of the same year, we chose Columbia Consulting to conduct Phase 1 environmental assessment to document potential environmental issues on reserves.
In October of this year, Títqet hired a land code coordinator. In 2018, January, Títqet formed a land code committee. Current committee members: Chairperson, Chief Coordinator Adolph Jones, Marie Barney, Cora Billy, Charlotte Halls, Genevieve Humphreys, and Marilyn Napoleon. They are serving until the land code is approved.
So February of this year, we compiled a list of eligible voters consisting of Títqet members who will be 18 years of age or older on March 31st, 2019. In May of 2018, Columbia Consulting shares environmental phase 1 report with Títqet. In July, we completed the draft of the community ratification process document. August, Bennett Surveys prepares report on encroachment issues on IR1. In October, Exton and Dodge surveyors began survey work on IR number 4 boundary. Same month, we also completed draft 2 of the Títqet Land Code.
Next up, we have to complete a draft of the individual agreement and have it reviewed by a lawyer. You get community input and members' review of draft number 2 of the land code, and if necessary, make amendments for draft number 3. And after that, share information. So each member of Títqet will get a copy of the notice of vote, so that's when the land code vote will be held, a copy of the land code itself, a summary of the land code, the individual agreement, a summary of the individual agreement, summary of the framework agreement, and a summary of the First Nations Land Management Act.
So development of our individual agreement. So the Minister of ISK and Títqet enter into an individual agreement to settle operational funding and specifics of the transfer administration of Títqet reserve land. So the Minister and Títqet both choose representatives. The Minister will provide a list of all interests, all information on environmental problems, and any information that may affect our interests. Amendments must be made in accordance with the procedures in the agreement.
Information is third party. So there are companies and persons that have an interest, such as a lease or a right-of-way in Títqet land. Before the vote, each person or company will receive a summary of the land code, the date of the ratification vote, a summary of the First Nation Land Management Act, a letter from Títqet explaining the effect of the ratification vote, and the name, office address, and telephone number of a person who may be contacted for the purpose of getting more information on land code.
So the community ratification process, the verifier Hugh Taylor will review the land code and individual agreements to ensure that these documents meet requirements set out in the framework agreement. A date will be chosen to hold a vote to approve the land code. A voting officer will be appointed. Pre-vote, vote, and post-vote procedures will be followed as set out in the community ratification process document.
So what is the community ratification process, or CRP? So both the land code and individual agreement must be approved by Títqet. 358 eligible voters as of March 31st, 2019, and this includes all members 18 and over that can register to participate. Majority of the voters who register, 50% plus one, must vote yes to approve the land code. So hypothetical scenario, if 125 members registered to vote, 64 must vote yes for the land code to be approved. There is a minimum number of voters who have to participate, and that number is 91. Voting will be held on a specified day or days at designated polling stations by mail-in ballots and electronic ballot on the internet.
So what are the risks to developing a land code? Títqet is fully responsible for the environmental management of our reserves, including any environmental issues that occur after the land code takes effect. The federal government will continue to be responsible for any environmental issue before the effective date of the land code. To ensure that they are accountable, an environmental assessment is completed for all our reserve lands before the vote and identified in the individual agreement. After implementing the land code, Títqet cannot go back to managing reserve lands under the Indian Act, so we must be ready to take on this responsibility.
Have any First Nations voted no to the land code, and why? In order for a land code to come into effect, at least 25% plus one of all eligible voters in the community must vote in favor of it. To meet this threshold, 91 Títqet eligible voters voting yes or no need to participate. Most of the communities whose land codes have resulted in a no vote is because not enough members turned out to participate. So this is why it's so important for members to participate in meetings, ask questions, and get the information they need before the vote.
So the Shtaliam Nation and land code, Lilwat has voted no. Naquaqua has voted no. Shqualef voted to approve their land code on March 28, 2004. Títqet is the fourth member of the Shtaliam Nation that has signed on to the framework agreement.
What are the principles we wish to include in our land code? Our culture, identity, language, and institutions are rooted in our relationship to our lands and resources. At no time have we left our territory, nor abandoned it to others. We are committed to protecting and controlling our lands. Our members are the most qualified and concerned with the protection, preservation, and management of our lands. We are able to make our own decisions and laws about how our lands are to be protected and how these lands will be governed. We will ensure that future generations will continue to benefit from the land that we and our ancestors have enjoyed. The federal government should not continue to control Títqet reserve lands under the provisions of the Indian Act.
How are we ready to resume control over our own land? Títqet has undertaken many planning and developmental initiatives and is prepared to take on planning and managing responsibility for Títqet reserve lands. To date, we have a physical development plan, land use plan, a revised comprehensive community plan, a cultural heritage policy, economic development action plan, and Títqet Council will be working with members to identify priorities and implement the values and vision of the community related to natural resources, land, and the environment. Do you have any questions, comments, or feedback? So if you have any questions, comments, or feedback, you can contact either Dean Billy, who is the land code coordinator, or Stephanie Louie, who is the land officer for Títqet. And you can also look at our website.